Well, it is a rare day indeed, my friends. I'm Father Sam Kachuba, here for The Tangent. I'm alone. No Matt Sparazza. These things happen. Today's one of those days he's not able to join me, but we have the privilege of having Joseph Pearce as our guest. Joseph Pearce is an English writer. He's an English convert to Catholicism and a really interesting fellow to speak to. Today we get to talk a little bit about his conversion experience, his work in writing and promoting great literature, his commentary, his knowledge of the Western canon of literature is fascinating. And we get to speak about an upcoming lecture that he's giving right here in the Diocese of Bridgeport on November 21st. The Bishop's Lecture Series is an opportunity for people to come and hear from great Catholic writers, speakers, theologians, artists, and to hear about truth, goodness, and beauty, the way that all of these things come together to help us to grow in our faith. Joseph Pearce will be here on November 21st speaking about the evangelizing power of beauty at the Barone Campus Center at Fairfield University, November 21st at 7 p.m. Check the show notes for a link and enjoy this episode with Joseph Pearce. Welcome to The Tangent. I'm Father Sam Kachuba, and Matt Sparazza is out today. And that means that I'm in charge of hitting record and turning the recording off. And Joseph Pearce, that means that you and I might be in for some difficulties today. I don't know. But I'm really glad to have you here. Thanks so much for joining me for The Tangent today.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I believe you just did a recording not too long ago with Bishop Frank on Let Me Be Frank. And I think in that recording, if I'm remembering it all correctly, and I've heard you on a number of podcasts, and I've read a bunch of your articles, and I have a couple of your books even, which is great. I don't have your newest book. We're going to talk about that later. But I believe you had a chance to speak a little bit to your conversion story and how you came into the Catholic Church, and also just that beautiful role of literature in your life. Could you give us, in a nutshell, how is it that you and I are sitting here today speaking as fellow Catholics, and the role of God's grace in your life?
Well, yes, and certainly that's where we need to begin. We need to begin with the miracle of grace, the miraculous grace that our Lord bestowed upon me, because I was very angry young man. So as a teenager, I got involved in radical politics back in my native England and joined a white supremacist organization, and rose to being chairman of the youth movement, that organization, and ended up going to prison twice for publishing material that to incite racial hatred. But I was also, as well as being a racist, very, very anti-Catholic, and I was involved in the anti-Catholic terrorist organisations in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, the Ulster Volunteer Force, the UBF, and the Ulster Defence Association, UDA. And I was also a member of the Orange Order, which is an anti-Catholic secret society. So I was very anti-Catholic and very, very angry and full of bitterness towards my neighbour. So it was certainly a miracle of grace, but brought about by reading some of these great writers that I've since been writing about. So in some sense, my life is an act of gratitude for not just the grace of God, but for these writers sort of coming into my life and allowing me to understand faith and reason, and eventually to come to Christ.
Wow. So which writer would you say was most influential in getting you back, or at least opening up your mind and your heart to the grace of God?
Well, the most important person under grace for my conversion is GK Chesterton. So I was introduced to his writings, and what he taught me. I was always brought up, and I think this is common enough in our culture, that you have to choose between faith or reason. If you can be religious but only by abandoning your reason, or you can be rational but only by abandoning religion.
Mm-hmm.
And what Chesterton showed me, of course, following the great traditions of the church and the great philosophers such as Thomas Aquinas, taught me that faith and reason, in fact, are inseparable, that they form an indissoluble union, what we might call it a marriage, fides et ratio. So when it became clear to me that the reason led to God, that was the beginning of the journey. And again, under grace, Chesterton was the most important influence. which is one of my first book as a Catholic was a biography of GK Chesterton, and I sometimes say that was an act of thanksgiving to God for giving me Chesterton, but also an act of thanksgiving to Chesterton for giving me God, so to speak.
I love it. You've got a book, English Literary Heroes, and I picked it up because I was surprised by the idea that there were Catholic English literary heroes, and of course I knew Chesterton, I knew Tolkien, but you really expanded a lot for me, and I think gave me a different perception of the role of Catholicism in English society in general. Uh, Having come from an anti-Catholic background, what did you discover as you were coming into the church? What did you discover about the role of the Catholic faith in your native England?
Yeah, so again, one thing, of course, was the fact that the history I'd been taught was what Hilaire Belloc called uh, the ignorant wickedness of Tom Ford Protestant history. That basically, the English have a received narrative which is not true. The English did not choose to leave the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was stolen from the English people by the king, who then destroyed all the monasteries. And there were 300 years of persecution of Catholics, 150 years of executions, followed by a further 150 years of persecutions, and as an effort to wipe Catholicism out in England. And when it seemed that it was going to be successful, and just a few tens of thousands of Catholics left, we then have the Irish Pagan famine led to Irish Catholic immigration to England. And at the same time, the conversion of people such as St. John Henry Newman led to a new Catholic cultural and literary revival. So the number of churches in England between this period between 1830 and 1880, number of churches, number of Catholic schools rose exponentially. You're talking hundreds of percent. The Catholic Church as well, in some senses, had risen from the dead, so to speak, in England.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've only been to England twice, I think, maybe three times. Anyway, however many times I've been to England, one thing that has always struck me is the presence of a very vibrant Catholic church there. And that was not something that I really anticipated. I went to our minor seminary here was called St. John Fisher, and being under the patronage of the English martyrs was always very very powerful. And visiting actually the Tower of London and being able to be in the place where John Fisher was martyred with Thomas More. Visiting, I was in York. I got to visit the home of St. Margaret Clitheroe and her execution site, and just to see that these places are preserved. I got to visit one. I don't remember what the name of it was or even where I was with the people who brought me there, but it was a place where I got to see one of the priest hiding holes. And I was so moved by that idea of people rebuilding their entire estate around this space where they could hide a priest and being as clever as possible. So the idea that there was this underground movement to keep the faith alive, and then that it's sort of reborn, that is such a powerful image. Um, as you were coming into the faith, you speak about G.K. Chesterton and his way, and his way with words is just so brilliant. I don't really know how to describe Chesterton adequately, but you're coming here to the Diocese of Bridgeport in a couple of weeks, November 21st. You're giving a talk at Fairfield University on the evangelizing power of beauty. So as you're reading literature and you're coming from a place of anti-Catholicism, coming from a place where you have no faith, what was happening as you were reading these great works of literature?
Well, I mean, it was an adventure and a pilgrimage, because I was beginning from one place of darkness and anger, and moving towards a place which is much more rational, much more full of an understanding of the good, the true, and the beautiful. And this is this understanding of the good, the true, and the beautiful being sort of triune, that they're inseparable, was a very important part of my movement towards Christ. That, and again, that sort of philosophy I got initially from reading people like Chesterton, and then Hilaire Belloc, C.S. Lewis, and eventually, John Henry Newman and Thomas Aquinas. So this was an adventure and a pilgrimage of grace, and that's actually a name. Pilgrimage of Grace is the name of one of the Catholic uprisings in England in defense of the church when Henry VIII tried to destroy the convents and monasteries. The people of northern England rose up in defense of the church, and it was called the Pilgrimage of Grace. Well, that's really what I was on from my period of darkness as a young man to the light of Christ.
Wow. Okay. Um, Outside of Chesterton, was there any specific thing that you got to read that opened up your heart more, that moved you from that place of anger?
Yeah, so I was sort of convinced at the time that my conversion was entirely rational. That that I'd been introduced to reason properly understood by Thomas Aquinas and what have you. Uh, but I realized later, looking back, that the other thing that was happening was not just the progress in reason, but a healing. That a lot of the things that were in my heart were irrational, but you couldn't just reason your way out of them because they were sort of prejudices and just feelings of anger and angst, and that required a spiritual healing as well as an intellectual engagement with goodness, truth, and beauty. So those two things were happening simultaneously, and of course, like I know that I remember at the time, about the time I was about to come into the church, there was St. John of the Cross, particularly the poetry of St. John of the Cross. Spoke very, very deeply to me of the mystery of God's presence in our lives and in our hearts.
Okay. Now, here's something I'm thinking about. You're speaking about the beauty of John of the Cross and his poetry, and it's all there. You're speaking about reading G.K. Chesterton, the power of literature. In my mind, I don't typically associate somebody who's involved in white supremacist activity with reading good literature. I don't associate people who are caught up in these kinds of activities where they're angry and violent and publishing hateful rhetoric. I wouldn't think that reading good, beautiful literature is going to be there. How did you come across this, and what happened?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I'm going to be giving a talk on the evangelizing power of beauty is because beauty is a powerful way of bringing people to Christ.
Yeah.
That I sometimes tell a story. You imagine there's a Catholic, a Protestant, a Jew, an atheist, a Muslim, and you take them into a field in the middle of the night, and you sit them down facing east, and then the light begins to change. The sky may possibly begins to turn sort of purple or pink. And then, I actually read a poem about the real experience of this midsummer in England back in the 1990s. And then the sun rises, and you can look directly at it. It's white at first, right? And it looks down for the Catholic, we'll see the elevation of the host perhaps as a symbol. The others won't necessarily see that. And then it turns from white to red, and you can still look at it, and it's beautiful. And as you turn to red, the sky is being painted shades of red as well. And then it turns to gold, and you have to avert your gaze, And I know that when I wrote my poem called Solstice Sunrise about this, I talked about the whiteness of the sun as well as being elevated host, being the joyful mysteries, and then the turns red, the sorrowful mysteries, and then gold, the glorious mysteries. So the point is, but even the Catholic might have all of that going on. That symbolism should not be available perhaps to the Protestant or the atheist or the Jew or the Muslim, but all of them will see the beauty. And in seeing the beauty, their hearts and minds will be lifted. And that's a definition of prayer: is the lifting of the mind and the heart. And so even if they don't know that they're being lifted up in prayer to God, that's exactly really is what's happening. So all of them, even if they have different ways of understanding it, are going to be moved closer to Christ. And the other story I sometimes tell, and this one called the story of the rock. Once upon a time there was a rock, and it was a beautiful rock, but nobody had ever seen it because this rock was buried under the ground. And then using human genius, which we call technology, someone dug the rock up. So now, after millions of years, it can be seen. And some people that have eyes to see say, well, that's actually quite a beautiful rock. And then one person comes along and he says, that's not a beautiful rock. That's the beautiful rock. And he takes that rock away and does things with it. And today, if you go to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, when you go into the main entrance of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome and turn to the right to the first side chapel there, you'll see Michelangelo's Pieta with the mother of Christ cradling her crucified son. Now, millions of people have seen that now. And every time they see it, irrespective of their religious faith, because everybody understands a grieving mother and an innocent victim, that everybody, Catholic, Protestant, Jew, atheist, is going to be lifted up when they see that thing of beauty, which human art and ingenuity made by the grace of God. This thing of beauty, which speaks to people's hearts and minds.
Hmm. It's funny as you were describing that rock buried underground, and then by technology bringing that rock up and out of the ground. The first thing that I thought of was Michelangelo. I'm glad you ended on Michelangelo because the whole story that you always hear with him is that he would see this block of marble, and he wouldn't just see the rock. He wouldn't just see this big cube. He would rather see the figures that were trapped within it, and it was his job to chisel them out and set them free. And his sculpture is so profound and so beautiful. I think precisely because he saw something that nobody else was able to recognize. But then those figures that he makes are so striking that anybody, regardless of your background, you're able to see the beauty. You're able to be struck by it. And yeah, precisely the Pietà is so, it's so arresting when you come in and stand in front of it. Um, it's a yeah, that's a very powerful image. Well, so if you're recognizing something being brought up and brought out, you go from this place of not having faith to being brought into the faith, as you said, thinking first that it was a rational thing, and upon further reflection, you recognize how influential the beauty all around you was. But from that point of conversion on, what did you do? What was your first step? Because you're leaving behind a whole life and a whole lifestyle, and now what you do is so different. So can you take me through a little bit of what was going on, and what were you doing from conversion to today, that has us speaking about literature
Yes,
and beauty?
yeah. So once it became clear to me that I needed to be received into the church, I left London. I left all my friends. I moved to a small city, Norwich in Norfolk in England, just to make a clean start, and start fresh. And then I was received into the church on St. Joseph's Day in 1989, and really have never looked back.
Mm.
So that was Maurice Spearing is a friend of Chesterton's and one of these literary converts about whom I've written. He said of his conversion that it was the one act in his life he's absolutely certain he'd never regretted.
Mm.
And I'm tempted to say the same thing, that I am married, I think I have to say the same thing about the day I got married as well. But but certainly my reception to the church was the defining moment of my life. It was something which transformed the way I not just the way I behaved, but the way I saw things, and the things that motivated me. So I said I started writing my book on Chesterton. I had a regular 9 to 5 job, so I had to write this book in my spare time. And then when it was published, I first of all, thanks be to God, it was published by a mainstream publisher in the UK, and then subsequently by Ignatius Press over here. First, my book was published over here also. And I knew that I couldn't do that again. You know, that the intensity of trying to write a 150,000 word book and doing the research for it while trying to hold down a regular 9 to 5. I thought you can do that once, you can't do it again. It's just
Yeah.
too much. So I had to make a choice of either just being relatively wealthy by having the advance and royalties of the book for a year or two, by my standards, which is not saying much, or to give up the day job and become a full-time writer and try to write another book before the money ran out. And that's the choice I made. So in 1996, I became a full-time writer, and then I had to write 2 books a year, basically, to keep a roof over my head and keep myself fed. And then I met a wonderful American lady in Oxford, and we got married, and then of course I realized I'd have to make an honest man of myself and get a proper job. so I so I applied for RBEC to Army University in the United States, and so 4 months after we got married, we moved to the States, and that's 4 days before 9/11. In fact,
Oh wow.
September the 7th, 2001, and so I came over here, and I somehow been managing to write books, even though I'm also having a lot of teaching and speaking and editing duties now.
Wow. Okay. I uh I was gonna ask if you were married pre or post conversion, and so that answers that question. Um, and I love the idea of making an honest man of yourself, uh, with with having these different things that you're doing. Um, uh, in my own life, my dad is a musician, and I think he almost went in the opposite direction. He had a real job, and then he decided to do music full time later in life. And so I don't know if that made him a dishonest man or not. Anyway, he's going to hear that and laugh at me, or I don't know. Anyway, um, so you've got a talent for writing. That's very evident. And as you unlocked that, what were you finding? Like, what's the process for you when you sit down to write a book? I've never had to write anything like that. The I think the longest thing I write regularly is my column for the parish bulletin. So it's 200 words, 500 words, something like that. It's not that long. You're talking about a 150,000 word book. How do you make that plan? What do you do?
Well, the first thing about writing a book, as opposed to writing essays for online journals, which I also do, you can write an essay of, so let's say a 1,000 word essay if you just got 2 or 3 hours in the morning or something. But if to write a book, you've really got to set aside at least a couple of days, because you've got to get into a space, and you're going to move up through, should we say, the inspirational gears, and that all takes a little bit of time. So this, but when you do that, I begin every day. One of my morning prayers is to ask that my words are His words, my words are God's words, and that my labors will bring myself and others closer to Him. So I do think that all creative work, and this would also apply to your father's uh, musicianship, all creative work should be an act of prayer and praise. I say the basic true art is giving back to the giver of the gift the fruits of the gift given. Of course, that's often not the case because we get in the way. Our human personhood and pride gets in the way. But certainly, what true art should be is an act of praise to give back to the giver of the gift, the fruits of the gift given. So everything we produce artistically should be an act of love for God, and something which is good, true, and beautiful that lead people to God.
Mm, okay. My dad, as a songwriter, would sit down and a song would just kind of come out. He'd have an idea, and within an hour or two, the song often would show up. Every once in a while, he'd have a melody in his head, and that would noodle around for weeks or months at a time, and then finally he'd get the words for it. But very often, he would just have this song. It would just come out. And I always admired that he was able to sit down and just write that way. I find when I sit down to write something, I tend to edit as I go, and I think that's the wrong approach. Um, Give me a little coaching as a writer. How do I get past the editing as I go and just write, just let it happen, and then go back and edit? What do I do?
Well, that's a difficult question because there is a mystique to the creative process, as you already indicated with your father's moments of inspiration. So the best things that I've written are the ones that I've written least, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
That you're not possessed. You don't just sort of sit there and sort of, God's just riding and you're just sort of like a zombie. It is a relationship, but up to a point. So there's the aptitude, and that's to say that, let's say, the 5 talents you've been given. That's the aptitude. That's the potential. But you, as well as having that aptitude, you have to have the right attitude. That's what I'm saying. The three ingredients of good writing are aspiration, inspiration, and perspiration. You have to want to write well. You have to then rely on the grace of God to enable you to write well. And then you have to work hard at it. Um, so, um, but certainly, if I go back and read something that's particularly good, I know that there's something mysterious happening, that my words somehow have been gifted to me
Mm.
by the grace of God. You know, that what we call inspiration. So something that's why the ancients talked about the muses, the goddesses of creativity, right? Because they understood. I mean, Homer begins the Iliad and the Odyssey with a prayer. You know, sing, muse. I mean, asking for the creative spirit to sing through him.
Mm.
You know, and I think that's what good art is, whether it's composing a song, or whether it's composing an essay, or composing a book.
Mm. Well, and you've got the ability to you've written your own poetry, you've written your own original work, you've written commentary, you've written essays on different subjects of things going on today, of just the things that you observe. But you've also been able to do a lot of writing about writing, uh, writing about writers, and that's maybe a little bit meta, but I love that idea of being able to kind of cross over all those different lines. So there's the personal creativity that comes out, your ability to express yourself and your own gifts, and also to be able to find and explain and demonstrate the gifts of other writers. So your most recent book, which you're going to have to tell me the title of again, but you've uh, written these 50 great works, 50 great novels, is it? That you're highlighting and summarizing. Let's talk a little bit about this book and what you're doing there.
Yeah. So the title of the book is Classic Literature Made Simple, and then the subtitle is 50 Great Works in a Nutshell.
Mm.
50 Great Books in a Nutshell, published by Ignatius Press. This has just come out in the last few weeks. So what I endeavored to do, a series that I wrote originally online, um, I tried to encapsulate the gist of 50 of the great works of Western civilization in about 1,000 words each. So it makes it pretty easy to read. It's a good introduction for people that haven't read these books and would like to. Of course, I don't want ideally to just read this and think they don't need to read the books. You know, I'm hoping that this will serve as an appetizer,
Mm.
and that people will say, "Oh, well, that particular work, you know, looks very interesting to me and very intriguing," and they go and get the book and read the book itself. So I'm hoping that this will be a way of people entering into the greatness of Christian civilization.
Okay. And are there spoilers, or is it really just that here we're whetting
Uh,
the appetite here?
Spoilers. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to encapsulate, then it's inevitable that there could be spoilers. I mean, I do try, but if it's a narrative, so a novel, for instance, I give the themes rather than the plot,
Mm.
because I think that the plot, if you give the plot away, then that's what spoils it. The plot spoils it. But if you can talk about the theme, so for instance, give one example: Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. You know, I talk about that in terms of Evelyn Waugh said it to the preface to the second edition that the theme of the work is the working of divine grace in the lives of the characters. So that means that, you know, we need to be reading the book supernaturally,
Mm.
because we need to be seeing the main protagonist in the novel is the hidden hand of God's presence. So we have to be that tells us how we need to read it. And then you see Brideshead, name of the stately home, the setting of much of the book, and who is the bride's head, the bridegroom, so that the bride's head itself becomes some sense a symbol for the church, and the characters that are there are us in some sense as members of the church. And then liturgically, the first part ends symbolically on Good Friday with the chapel being deconsecrated, and the Blessed Sacrament being removed from the tabernacle, and character of Cordelia there, one of the holiest characters in the novel, said it was as if it's always going to be Good Friday. So
Mm.
symbolically, the first part of the novel ends on Good Friday, and then the final part of the chapter book is back in the same chapel, same tabernacle, but the Blessed Sacrament has been restored, and so we have this image of Easter Sunday, of resurrection. So and was following the literary techniques used by many other writers in Christian civilization. So, for instance, very briefly, the Divine Comedy begins on Maundy Thursday, on Holy Thursday, and Dante descends into hell on Good Friday and emerges the light of the sun at the foot of Mount Purgatory on Easter Sunday morning, and then ascends Mount Purgatory into heaven during the Easter season. So you see how literature can be interwoven with liturgy in such a way as to indicate the spiritual and theological depths of the work.
Okay. I'm glad you're bringing up Brideshead Revisited, because I've read it a few times and always had a hard time with what I've been told of finding the hidden presence of God within the story. It's just always, I think, I don't know, maybe I'm getting too caught up in each individual character and some of the like the unique aspects of the way that they speak, of the things that they're doing, and uh, I feel like sometimes I'm psychoanalyzing them, trying to figure out what their motivations are and everything. And the house itself, though, I think that I've completely missed exactly what you just described: the deconsecration of the chapel, the removal of the Blessed Sacrament, and the restoration of the Blessed Sacrament. I don't think I ever focused there. So now I have to go back and reread it. You've given me a good assignment. Of these 50
Well, that's
classic.
good. I mean,
Uh,
yeah, as I said, that my hope is that people read the 1,000 words and then it's an appetizer, and they go and actually enjoy the main course, which is the work itself. And if you just you're going now intending to go back to the right, said obviously I've succeeded,
yeah,
so that's good.
you've done it. Well done. Of these 50 works of classic literature, uh, you narrowed it down to 50. There's obviously countless great works of literature out there, but you've chosen these 50. And um, you mentioned before that it's about the Christian civilization. So are these all explicitly Christian books, or are these things that we find in sort of the canon of Western literature, or how do you approach it?
Yeah, so the latter, because I begin, for instance, with the Iliad and the Odyssey, and also the Oedipus cycle by Sophocles and the Aeneid by Virgil. These are all pre-Christian,
Right.
but then after that, I mean, it's during Christian civilization. But I would say that great literature should never be explicitly Christian. It should be implicitly Christian, because literature it can teach, but the subtlety and nuance, but it should not preach. Once a writer of literature, of fiction, for instance, of a novel, is trying to preach to his audience, it destroys the story. So the mystique of literature is that the goodness, truth, and beauty that is revealed as we read, in a way which is not preaching, but nonetheless teaching.
Mm.
And so, in that sense, these great works of Western civilization and Christian civilization lead us deeper into the mystery of God's presence in life. I mean, look, this is what I talk about. The three understandings of humanity which we've lost. Well, the secular culture's lost. Christianity hasn't. So secular culture gives us a scientific label, Homo sapiens, which is a very stupid label to give us, because Homo sapiens means wise man, and if you look at the history of humanity, wisdom is not how defined a characteristic. Uh, every generation makes the same mistakes in previous generation because we're too stupid to learn the lessons of the past. Um, so that's not a good label for us. Nor is Homo economicus, where we're just cogs in the economic machine. We're just producers and consumers.
Yeah.
That doesn't tell us who we are. The three older understandings is anthropos, the Greek word for man, which according to Plato means he who turns up in wonder.
Mm.
So which we talked earlier about looking at the sunrise. I mean, that's anthropos, looking up in wonder, in a sense of gratitude. But then you have Homo viator, that we are all man on a journey, that each of our lives is a journey. Ultimately, it's a pilgrimage. The purpose of life is to get to heaven. And if our lives are a journey, they're also a story. So that one of the reasons we learn the most valuable lessons through the telling of stories is because we are in a story ourselves. And we are, in fact, telling a story by the facts of our lives, and telling a story to others by the facts of our lives. And then the other aspect of it is Homo superbus, proud man, the one who doesn't want to go on the journey, who doesn't want to take the appointed path, that either doesn't want to go anywhere in particular, or wants to wander off wherever they like. And the trouble is that this homo superbus and homo viator, each of us is both. So as Dostoevsky and Solzhenitsyn remind us that the battle between good and evil takes place in each individual human heart. Each of us is a civil war between the homo viator we're called to be and the homo superbus we're tempted to be. And that civil war in our hearts on the journey of life is made manifest most beautiful in the telling of stories. And and of course storytelling was sanctified by Christ himself, because first of all, how does God reveal himself? By entering the story, his story, history, salvation history, and through the greatest story ever told, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's how we come to know God on a much deeper level, because he reveals himself to us in the story of his life, death, and resurrection. But then within that, he also tells us stories, parables, fictional narratives that are nonetheless are very powerful tellers of moral truths. So Christ himself shows us it's through the art of storytelling that we come to understand the deeper truths.
Okay. Um, I was glad you brought up Dostoevsky there, because I've always loved his approach, especially in Crime and Punishment. You see this despair and the darkness of humanity, and yet there's also somewhere in there there's goodness. You know it's there, and you're just trying to find it. You're as you're reading, you see that there's that interior search for how can I find what's good in me, and I think we often do get stuck there, but literature, and Dostoevsky is just one example of it, is able to hold that tension between those spaces where there's goodness, there's what is broken, and so the wholeness and the healing that God wants to give to us, as well as that brokenness that sin brings about, and you see it like reflected there in those great characters. But also this idea of not preaching in your writing is very powerful, because I think you're right that, well, Crime and Punishment at least, but lots of other great literature, it becomes so powerful not because it's telling you you're supposed to do this, but because it's presenting a story of people wrestling with those problems, a story of those challenges. So yeah, that's really good. So of these 50
Yeah, and the
stories,
consequences.
no, go ahead. I'm
Sorry.
sorry.
And the consequences of the actions of the characters, right? So virtuous actions have positive consequences, and sinful actions have negative consequences. So that a narrative can teach those lessons without preaching. You just see that this person takes this particular course of action that's motivated by sin of some sort, pride, animus, and that leads to their fall and the fall of others and innocent victims. And you just see, you see that and say, well, quite clearly, there is a punishment that comes with the crime,
Mhm.
because there's negative consequences to sin.
Yeah. As you're looking at these 50 works of classic literature that you've chosen, um, maybe this isn't a fair question, but do you have a top five? What are your absolute favorites that you've that you've written about?
Yeah, I like to cheat because I get asked the question: if you want a desert island and you can only take one book, you could have the Bible and one other book. What will you take? And I say, well, I think I take the complete works of William Shakespeare. So it's sort of cheating because
But it is in one
in
book.
one book, though,
Yeah,
in
it's
one
it's
book,
really big, but
it
it's
is in
one
one
book.
book. Yeah, but yeah, it's obviously very very difficult to choose. But I think that the three giants of Western literature are Homer, Dante, and Shakespeare.
Mm,
So both of Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are absolutely magnificent. Dante's Divine Comedy is probably the greatest poem ever written. And plays such as Hamlet and King Lear are the greatest plays ever written. But yeah, if I had to choose one, I would probably choose Dante's Divine Comedy.
mm. Okay, all right. Um, the Divine Comedy gets a lot of attention, I think, and deservedly so. I don't want to downplay Dante or anything here, but the journey that he takes his reader on. Um, what strikes you the most as you're looking at the Divine Comedy, um, and is it different for you each time you go back and read it? Are you finding sometimes, there's the Inferno, there's the uh, Purgatorio, the Paradiso, like are there different places that you find yourself more attracted at different times as you're reading?
Yeah, I mean, all great works of literature, when you go back and revisit them, because they're sort of living things in some mystical way, you do see new things in them, or they speak to you in a new way. So you never go back to great work of literature and just say, well, I've done that. I mean, you've enjoyed it, you've experienced it, you've been edified by it. You go back and you'll get a different sort of enjoyment, experience, and edification. So the key thing with the divine comedy is not to make the mistake which many people do, particularly in the modern academy, that they only read the Inferno.
Mm.
And that's like only reading the Fellowship of the Ring and not bothering to read the rest of the Lord of the Rings, right? I mean, the Divine Comedy is not three works; it's one work.
Right.
And the only point of Dante descending into hell is in order to come out the other side and to ascend Mount Purgatory, and to get into heaven, and ultimately the climax of the poem have to be in the presence of the beatific vision. I mean, that's the purpose of it. That's why it's called a comedy. A comedy is not because it's funny. A comedy is because it has a happy ending, right?
Mm.
And so if you just go to the Inferno, right, you end up at the end of the book in the presence of Satan, on a sea of ice. I mean, that's not the purpose of the journey. That he has to take that journey
Mm.
to understand, look sin in the eye, look each of the seven deadly sins in the eye, understand their destructiveness, the human soul and human society. It's only when he has that fullness of that understanding that he can emerge purgatorially and seek to have his own sins forgiven. So that there's a whole purpose to this, and of course, eventually his sins are washed away. He gets the earthly paradise of Mount Purgatory, which is sort of like the fact that we managed to get back to the garden, should we say, back to Eden, because all our sins have been purged. It's only then, when we get back to that prime of innocence, we can ascend it into paradise, ascend it to heaven.
Mm. Okay. Yeah. I I'm with you. I think that the probably the thing that I've heard the most about when uh, you read things or you hear somebody mention the Divine Comedy, there is an awful lot said about hell and not an awful lot that's repeated about what he actually is writing about purgatory or about heaven. So, yeah, that's a good insight. I appreciate that. Now, you mentioned Hamlet and King Lear in particular from Shakespeare as the most important plays. Um, Shakespeare's a fascinating character, and I'd be interested to see, like, when you read Shakespeare, what do you find is pointing you towards God as you're reading in his works?
Well, yeah. So I've written three books on Shakespeare, and I'll cover seven of his plays in these 50. So I'm obviously someone who loves Shakespeare and is fascinated by him. So the first of my books on Shakespeare was called The Quest for Shakespeare, The Bard of Avon and the Church of Rome, where I show the biographical and historical evidence for Shakespeare's Catholicism, because it's very important to understand an author and his work and his times in order to understand the work on a deeper level. So more we understand what motivates. So, for instance, if Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien tells us, and I'm quoting him word for word here, The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. Well, when the author, who is the one who has the most authority, the authorial authority, tells you something like that, it should make you, and in fact, it's insistent really, you go back and you look at that story with the looking for this fundamentally religious and Catholic dimension, because that's what the author says there. The same thing with Shakespeare. Once you know that Shakespeare was a believing Catholic at a time when it was illegal to practice Catholicism in England, it's punishment by death to be a priest, punishment by death to hide a priest from the authorities. You mentioned St. Margaret Clitheroe. I mean,
Yeah.
that was what she was crushed to death for. She was executed for hiding priests. So if Shakespeare's living in these times where to be a Catholic makes you an outlaw, effectively, so this makes itself manifest in his plays. So just to give one example, Hamlet. It was illegal in Shakespeare's time to write plays about contemporary religion and politics. You couldn't do it. So Shakespeare sets, his story of Hamlet in Denmark, in ancient Denmark. But his audience for the something rotten in the state of Denmark is the something rotten in the state of England,
Yeah.
right? And he's venting his spleen in that play very much against spies. The spy network, Polonius the spy master, Claudius employs the spy network, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Um, even Ophelia is spying on Hamlet, which causes him to get into an nunnery scene. He's very angry when he realizes that the woman he loves is also spying on him. So in Shakespeare's England, the priests were betrayed by spies. So either forced convert, people pretend to convert so they get into the Catholic world and then find out where Catholic masses are being said or where the priests are. So this spy network was a curse for Catholics. So we see when you understand that sort of anger that a Catholic would feel towards the treachery of those who spy on others, then that really sort of brings to life the anger and angst which we see animated in Hamlet.
Mm. I'm remembering now this encounter I had. I went to visit an elderly woman in my parish to bring her communion, and she had this statue in the corner, and it was a pretty striking statue of this woman. And I asked her what it was, and she said, "Well, I thought it was the Blessed Mother." And I liked it so much, and I asked the man at the antique store if I could buy it, and I told him it's because I love the Blessed Mother and I want this lovely statue of the Blessed Mother. And he said, "Ma'am, that's not the Blessed Mother." And he turned the statue, and you can see on the bottom it's carved there that it's Ophelia from Hamlet. And somebody
Huh?
had sculpted Ophelia from Hamlet, and she was so convinced it was the
Well,
Blessed Mother. But she just loved that it was Ophelia, so she bought it in part for the story. That she thought it was the Blessed Mother, it turned out to be Hamlet, and so there we go. Anyway, that was what was coming to mind right away. But the uh, the idea of Shakespeare as a Catholic, I know that this gets some controversy and everything, but whenever I've read Shakespeare, I can't help but see first just the beauty of his language, but that there is something very, very uh, sacramental in the language that he uses and in the stories that he tells.
yeah, very much so. And I mean, the people such as St. John Henry Newman and GK Chesterton, they saw that Shakespeare had to be Catholic. But from the time of the Victorian times, Richard Simpson was one of the pioneers. There's been a lot of just good, solid historical evidence
Mm.
to that's been dug up to show that Shakespeare's a Catholic. Just to give one example, but just before he retired and left London for good to go back to Stratford-upon-Avon, he bought the Blackfriars Gatehouse, which actually, as the name would suggest, was the gatehouse to the Dominican house in London. You used to go to London today, there still is a Blackfriars district, Blackfriars Tube Station, Blackfriars
Mm-hmm.
Bridge. Well, this is where the Blackfriars were, where the Dominicans were. Henry VIII shut down, obviously, all the religious houses, including that one. But the gatehouse then passed into the hands of Catholics. Then we got, obviously, the property deeds. So from the time of the dissolution of the monasteries in the 1530s, right through when Shakespeare bought it in 1613, I think, 1612 or 1613. So for 80 or so years, this house remained in Catholic hands and was known to be a centre for underground Catholic activity. The house was raided on more one occasion. There are reports of there being secret passageways leading down to the river, for which priests could escape. And this is the house that Shakespeare buys. And when he buys it, he's not going to live in it. He's going to move back to Stratford-upon-Avon, but he buys it and then he stipulates that the tenant, John Robinson, should remain the tenant. In other words, that the house should just continue to be used as it had been used. And in the same year that Shakespeare buys that house, John Robinson's brother enters the English College in Rome to study for the priesthood.
Ah.
And John Robinson is the only one of Shakespeare's London friends who's around during Shakespeare's violent illness and signs his will. So, this is just one piece of evidence. I mean, there's many, many others, but that should give you some sort of example. And then the other type of evidence, that's the biographical evidence, the historical evidence. The other is the textual evidence from the plays. So my second book was called Through Shakespeare's Eyes, Seeing the Catholic Presence in the Plays, where we're actually, now that we know Shakespeare was a Catholic living in anti-Catholic times, how does this play itself out in his plays? And when you look at his plays, you see that this Catholic presence is palpable.
Mm, that's fantastic. Have you been to the English College in Rome and seen it, their chapel?
Yeah,
I was
I
so
have.
struck. I mean, you
The
go in,
images are marvelous.
it's
It's marvelous.
amazing.
Yeah.
They've got the beautiful images all around the chapel of the martyrs, and then that wall immediately outside. So every time you go into the chapel, you see these names, and every time you exit the chapel, you see the names of just all of the martyrs that these men went to study there, knowing that they were going to a certain death, and they went anyway. And their names are inscribed on that wall. It's There's a reason we call it the Venerabile, that this is the venerable college where these great saints went. It's so fascinating. All right, in this interview so far, we've been able to do, in a nutshell, the story of the Joseph Pearce conversion. We've been able to do, in a nutshell, the career and writings and how you got to this point, and we've been able to talk about your most recent book, The Classic Literature Made Simple, and the nutshell that you're giving us of 50 great works of literature. November 21st, you're coming here to the Diocese of Bridgeport to give the Bishop's Lecture at Fairfield University at 7 p.m. November 21st at the Barone Campus Center. I'm looking forward to going there. It's right down the street from me, so it'll be a nice opportunity to hear your talk. Your talk is The Evangelizing Power of Beauty. Can you give us the nutshell version of the talk? No spoilers, because I want people to go to the talk, but
Yeah, so I will be showing that beauty. Beauty is one of the triune transcendentals. In other words, that beauty cannot be separated from goodness or truth. That there is something rational. The beauty is not in the eye of the beholder; it's in the thing beheld. And if something is intrinsically beautiful and we don't see the beauty in it, it's not because it's not beautiful; it's because we're blind. So part of an understanding of beauty is to learn how to see it. And when you see the integrity and entirety of something which is beautiful, you're seeing the ratio in it. You're seeing the presence of the logos in it, in harmony and form, and then of course this is good. So this connection between virtue, reason, and beauty is what I'm going to be trying to unravel in a
okay.
hopefully a very, very accessible way to the audience.
Okay, I love it. As we look at beauty then, and how beauty brings us into communion with God, when you look at the church today, how can the church better enhance beauty? How can the church better use beauty to bring people closer to Christ?
Well, certainly, within the church, the heart of the church is the liturgy. So, I'm a great lover of Benedict XVI and his wonderful book, The Spirit of the Liturgy. And he said, that if we don't have beauty in the liturgy, this world will just become, like hell. That really, the church has a responsibility to make its liturgies things of great beauty. That through the beauty we are lifted in goodness and truth towards the Lord. So I think that's important for the church to get that right. But of course, the church has inspired. Benedict XVI said that in the end, the only two really good arguments for the Catholic Church are the saints she's inspired and the great works of beauty that she's inspired. So the holiness of her saints and the beauty of the art of Christian civilization that's been inspired by the church. And of course, that's the music for liturgy, Gregorian chant, polyphony. And then, of course, the great religious works of art, crucifixion, the Diamond Child, and of course these wonderful works of literature which we've been talking about today.
Fantastic. Yeah. Oh. Well, I'm really excited to see you in person and to hear where you go with this lecture. But thanks for the work that you do. It's powerful, and I'm looking forward to reading more about these great works of literature. And all I can say is keep up the good work that you're doing, bringing that beauty and bringing good works of literature to people. Joseph Pearce, thank you so much for joining me today on The Tangent.
Well, thank you for having me, Father. It's been a joy and a pleasure, and I'm delighted to know that we'll be meeting in the flesh in a few weeks. I'm looking forward to it.
Amen. Thanks so much.